Our next speaker also comes from a faith background. Jet Takaoka is, excuse me, Jet Takaoka is with the Mennonite Central Committee. He's worked in fund development with faith-based organizations that alleviate extreme poverty around the world for 22 years. He's currently the advanced director of the Mennonite Central Committee, British Columbia. So MCC is a faith-based organization which expresses God's love for all by meeting the basic human needs for uprooted and vulnerable people. They work in 45 countries, as well as here in Canada. Jet, thank you so much for joining us today. We're very honored to have you.
So much, Yusuf. It's a privilege to be here, and I must say quite humbling to be in such a gathering of people doing such great work. So salam, shalom, sat shri akal, peace to all who are gathered here. We want to have a good conversation in a good way. And thank you for that introduction, Yusuf. I just want to read just a couple sentences from a document that MCC has published, our principles and practices. And actually you heard Yusuf say some of the words, but Mennonite Central Committee, shorthand is MCC, a worldwide ministry of Anabaptist churches that would be one expression of the Christian faith. We share God's love and compassion for all by responding to basic human needs and working for peace and justice. MCC envisions communities worldwide in right relationship with God, each other, and creation. So even in that statement, I find so much basis for hope and optimism that we can come together around these important things. And I think if there's a ray of hope and good news in all of us, in all of this, so many of us coming from our respective cultures, faith traditions, backgrounds, realize that there's so much more now that unites us, even if it's of necessity, than should be keeping us apart at this time. As far as MCC and our response in recent months, MCC is headquartered in Abbotsford, which I would acknowledge is situated on the traditional and unceded territories of the Stolo peoples, and specifically the Samath and Musqueam First Nations. They are our neighbors, they are great friends to us, and have been so gracious in accepting our presence there in Abbotsford and up and down the Fraser Valley. Following the wildfires last summer, we were able to provide some relief, food, hot plates, toasters, basic utensils for families that had evacuated from Lytton and up and down the canyon, and some had arrived at Shway Village in the east end of the Fraser Valley. So we were able to provide some support that way. And then like several have expressed on this call, much of our response has been very grassroots, very spontaneous and organic. And as Chris mentioned earlier, we found ourselves acting in the role of facilitator. And really MCC, our mandate from our constituent churches really is more international. MCC is tasked with responding to international incidents, things like the Haiti earthquake, things like the tsunami of 2004, 2005. And we have a sister organization here at home called Mennonite Disaster Service. And so we found ourselves working very closely with MDS. MDS is largely a volunteer organization, and that's especially true here in BC and in the Fraser Valley. And put quite simply, they found themselves facing a capacity issue. So a great many of our constituents were responding. They were responding financially. We were able to receive the donations, which in the end totaled just over, I think, $400,000. And we were able to support MDS, Mennonite Disaster Service, working in both Princeton, where there was a great deal of damage, and I would say less resource brought to bear, and then also in the Fraser Valley. And it was some of our constituent churches became, I would say, community hubs. So this would include Yarrow United Mennonite Church, Yarrow Mennonite Brethren Church in the sort of on the eastern edge of Sumas Lake, and the eastern part of where some of the floodwaters had come. And then also on the other side in Arnold to the west, there's Arnold Community Church. And in each of those situations, those churches became like community centers. So for instance, almost overnight, Arnold Community Church, which has quite a large parking lot, became a transfer station. So people began, as houses were mucked out and wet drywall, wet insulation and so forth, and debris and waste was taken away. It was brought to the parking lot of Arnold Community Church, which became the transfer station. And then that just became a rallying point for groups of volunteers who were helping homes to clean up and muck out. And indeed, even some rebuilding. In fact, I believe it's next week, one of the final homes we're going to help rebuilding. We actually have assembled a team of volunteers to go and paint, to put the finishing touches on one of the houses that's being essentially rebuilt, rehabilitated. I believe the total between Princeton and Yarrow and Arnold is somewhere on the order of 50 homes. So these would be families who didn't have access to other resources that we identified or had some relationship with, that we've been able to help them get their homes back into livable conditions. So we're just very pleased to have even a small part in that. We don't take a lot of credit for ourselves. We just became, again, as Chief Chris said, we became sort of facilitators. Beyond all that work, though, MCC, we wanted to, to put it in Christian terminologies, if I may. We talk about creation care, and I think we have something to share in that regard. We know we have much to learn, especially from our Indigenous neighbors. But even as we speak, MCC is undertaking amongst our supporters and donors and constituents an advocacy campaign called For the Love of Creation. We also, just as Rabbi Brugman expressed early on the call, somewhere we went astray. We fell prey to greed, and I guess we got confused. The earth was not here given us to exploit. It was ours to steward. And maybe we're learning these lessons a bit late, but we're trying to provide education, theological reflection, advocacy initiatives, and action amongst our donors, supporters, and constituents. Each of our projects now worldwide has a sustainability component, and indeed our activities here at home in fundraising, we have a sustainability piece embedded in one of our 5 strategic initiatives. We're now measuring our carbon footprint. We now evaluate very careful when and if we will travel, for what purpose, what will be the not just economic, but the ecological cost of travel. And we're trying to model what we should have been doing all along. And we acknowledge that now, and we look for the best way forward. And we would want very much to be part of conversations and discussions about how we can operate and serve together across ethnic and faith traditions and communities. Together, we know we can be much, much stronger. So thanks so much for having us. It's a privilege, and I'm humbled to be here today.